All right, as promised, this is the video that'll explain the process of creating standards-based rubrics. By the way, this took me a long time, so bear with me. So this is the final product. This is the rubric. It has standards-based levels for the 4 themes that I am assessing this particular first grade assessment. So it says a theme mini making, and then the standard that I'm using, theme effective expression, the standard that I'm using, the language development, and the standard, and then the final one is a foundational skill standard, which could be for all levels, but I'm focusing primarily on ELD1. Let me zoom in. So for theme meaning making, you see that I have the 4 levels. I'm using the standard language in its grading, and then I'm mimicking the language that you guys would find in the LPAC descriptions. So a 4 is overall, a 4 is well developed, a 3 is moderately developed, a 2 is a somewhat developed, and a 1 is a minimally developed. So I use that language in the 4 levels for grading someone on theme meaning making. Did they justify opinions by articulating some relevant textual evidence or background knowledge with visual support? It's the same thing with effective expression, language development, and foundational skills. So whatever assessment I decide that I'm going to give these students, this one happens to be comprehension of oral presentations and discussions with answering questions. So that's in the prompt here. I can grade the performance task as the student is doing or shortly afterwards and grade it based on the standards. Or if we're not ready for a standards-based grading system, there's a conversion table that we can create at the bottom, but more on that later. So how did I get to a final rubric for just one assessment? I first went to my specific grade levels. Standards that I'm focusing on. So imagine this is for ELD1. I decided I'm going to focus on 2 meaning making standards, ELD standards, which are right here highlighted in blue. And then I made and added those qualifiers for each of those 2 standards. So you see standard 1 has the minimally, and then standard 2, the second one, also has minimal. For the second level, it's the same standard, but now it has some or somewhat. It's the same 2 standards, but level 3, now it gives us adequate or moderately. And then the same 2 standards, but now the level 4 is competent or sufficient. For effective expression, I'm choosing 3 that I want to focus on for the year. But again, it's up to everyone's choice which one they're going to choose. And then I went, and for each of those standards, I gave it using the language level descriptors for all 4 levels. I went to going down to language development. I chose 4 standards that I want to focus on for the entire year. And then I gave those individual standards the level indicators. And then foundational skills, I chose 3. And again, this is for ELD1, which are foundational reading and understanding skills, and then I gave those 4 standards. Now, there are different ways that each class is going to come up with for standards and what you guys are going to decide. You guys know your students best, so you guys will be able to use the LPAC. Say you know that your students really do need more listening skills. So if you go to this tab where it has EL listening, you go to the listening tab, you're going to see the most frequently used standards that you may want to consider for your class. So say it's really speaking. We need to make sure that we're doing more speaking. But for the LPAC, there's primary standards for speaking, and then there's the secondary ones. The secondary ones are, they need these to be able to communicate effectively, which could be from language standards or grammar skills. So that's option one. Option two would be using the LPAC scores. So when we use the LPAC scores, we get an overall grade for the student, and we can find out an overall grade for our classes. We can also get overall grades for our students in the class. The difficult part is we're going to start averaging all our cohorts to find out which of the 4 domains they really do struggle in, which wouldn't be a bad idea to just check when the school year starts, what are our students' main struggles, and then also there has to be a discussion about when we do ILPs, are we going to use the rubrics that we're using in our ELD class, or are we going to create separate rubrics for their ILPs because they might have a different weakness than the overall class? Something to think about. So again, I had chosen my standards. I chose my standards for the class through my discussion or using LPAC, and then I gave every standard its own kind of course, so then I can create, just pulling and picking which standard I want to focus on for an assessment, I can create rubrics like this. Now, the difficult part, how did I even get into picking those standards, or where did those standards fall into? Well, the framework, and this is where it gets really confusing. The framework groups several ELD standards into various themes. This is why I think if there's going to be changes in the future, we're going to update the California state standards or the ELD standards. They're going to follow more of the themes, and they're going to start condensing or grouping or taking out specific ELA or ELD standards to make them make more sense. Right now, if you see in meaning making, there are 19 ELD standards that would fit in meaning making, but a lot of those ELD standards also appear in the theme effective expression. They repeat all over again because they're written so broadly, or that they include all these things. And then some of those standards you'll see in language development again repeat because they're just all over the place. To keep everyone's sanity, what I did is I went ahead and started filtering out the ELD standards that we can address most specifically for meaning making, and they won't repeat in the themes for effective expression, and then also cleaned up language thing. So really, one of your summer projects, if you guys have time, is going through and seeing if the choices that are there make sense, or you guys have suggestions of moving things around. I already asked if you guys would be able to look at 2 specific standards because they sound like both meaning making and language. We would just have to decide as a group where do we want to put those 2 standards, but please take a look at all of them so that we're all comfortable saying that that's a language standard or a thing, or that's a meaning making thing. The language foundational skills, those are directly from the ELA, and the ELD standards don't give us hints on what those, but they make reference to the ELA, so I just included all of them in here. There's a lot, but again, we get to choose which ones we're going to focus on for the entire year. That isn't to say that we're not going to focus on any of these standards throughout, even though the suggestion is to probably pick 8 to 12 per classroom, because when you create standards-based assessments, just keeping track of these standards while you're assessing the student, 4 of them is a lot to keep track of. So trying to make sure that you don't have more than 3 or 4 standards per assessment, and then throughout the year you're not assessing more than 12, because that's, again, we're trying to keep track of all this for data purposes. So if I can go back to the beginning, this is again an example of a rubric that we would have. The student is giving oral responses. We need to just,